Brought to you today by Interior Life, which features spiritual master classes that provide tradition-based teaching sessions that apply the truths of our faith to everyday life using practical details and insights without sacrificing the mystical, supernatural nature of Catholicism. Follow the link in the description to learn more about Interior Life. Good morning or good evening or whenever it is you're watching this, if you're watching this later, but it is presently about 1:25 in the morning here in central Oklahoma on a Sunday, and we're going to do another one of these late night with Return to Tradition late night live streams. I hope you are doing well today. I am going to attempt to bring the actual stream up here in another window so I can see how many people are actually watching while I'm doing this, because I can't see it from my screen from my little command center here, while I also make sure that I don't do something as silly as mute. There we go. So here we are today. We have rather famous or infamous Archbishop has given an interview with Catholic Family News. That'd be Archbishop Cardinal Vegano. And he makes the, I think, the most important accusation he has made in actually a few years. That's saying something. And the accusation is this, that there are a rather large number of cardinals running around the Roman Curia right now who don't believe Francis was ever validly placed on the throne of Peter, that he is an invalid pope. He hints at that rather strongly in this excerpt from this interview that I'm going to give to you here. This deserves its own sort of separate video than other things I use this long interview in later in the week, because he's hinted at this, but he's never actually come out and say it. And then one thing he doesn't actually do here, unfortunately, is name names. He just never does that. And that's really an unfortunate thing, because at the end of the day, it's, I kind of wish that he's gotten to the point where it's clear he doesn't have the support of a lot of these bishops. It really is true. And unfortunately, you and I both wish he did, but he doesn't. And it is what it is, right? So my suspicions is that he's talking about the better bishops, because who would care if Cardinal Coco Palmieri or Cardinal Pietro Parolin or Cardinal Tobin or Cardinal Supich, if they knew that Francis didn't come by the traditional mechanisms to the papacy, that he had been put there through invalid politicking? Why would they care? No, I think this is directed towards some of the better bishops. We don't know the names of all of the better cardinals in the Roman Curia and who have served in the past. Many of them are closing in on retirement, though. But you can take a guess as who some of these folks are that we mean. Tend to think Cardinal Syrah, because he would have been at the last conclave. Cardinal Burke, because he was at the last conclave. Figures like that. So before we get into that, I want to make sure that if you are a channel member watching this, by the way, you as a channel member have something that no one else has as an option, and that is a free super chat or super sticker. It doesn't cost you anything. I think you get one, per stream, or maybe it's per month, but I've never seen anybody use that. And I'm pretty sure there's somebody in the stream now watching in the stream who is a member. So feel free to use that option. Again, it shouldn't cost you anything. So go ahead and do that. And if that's not just a member on my channel, maybe you're not a member of my channel watching me say this, but you are a member of, say, Taylor Marshall's channel, or maybe some non-Catholic channel, just you have a channel membership somewhere, you get at least one free super chat. So please use those. If you can, it's a perk that you get. Also, last week, you'll remember last time I did one of these, you'll remember that there's a person out there offering free material for the Holy Face devotion. They have medals that have been blessed by a priest, no cost to you. They will send them to you, and they had an email address. I put it on the website. They got several emails from people, and I suggested that they come up with a website instead. And so I'm going to put it in the live chat. If I can get the link that they sent me to work, there it is. So give me a second here. It's going to go in the live chat for you guys to look at later. So there's the website link right there. It's in the live chat, and I will, after the stream, put it up in the comments. I'll put it in a pinned comment and in the description box for ease of your use. So again, for those of you who've wanted the Holy Medal of Holy Face devotional materials that are being offered for free from a layperson, They are pre-blessed by a priest, and they don't cost you anything. So there's a link in the live chat right now, and will be one in the pinned comment later. So let's get to what Archbishop Vigano here says. He basically accuses many of the cardinals of essentially misuse of their authority, and completely just failing in their basic duty of protecting the church. Part of the job of the College of Cardinals is, of course, the main job is the election of the Roman Pontiff. And they do it behind closed doors, without the media, to try to prevent outside influence from happening. There are strict rules about the process to elect the Roman Pontiff. You're not permitted to politic behind the scenes. Not supposed to lobby for votes, right? That's how it's supposed to work. Cardinal Denials, the late Cardinal Denials, he, after Francis was foisted upon the church, had this kind of a bragging statement he gave at some luncheon somewhere, and it was caught on video, where he said that they lobbied for Francis. Now, I don't know if that's true, or if that's just sort of a, kind of stuff people say, to make themselves look better when they've had a couple too many glasses of wine in their system, whatever it is. But if it's true, at least according to a document promulgated by John Paul II, that would invalidate the papacy of Francis. Huge implications here. And Archbishop Vigano here is basically saying a lot of the cardinals know about this, and they failed in their duty to protect the church because they just chose to remain silent on this, and there's enormous implications. So I'm going to give you his actual words here from the interview with Matt Gaspers at Catholic Family News. So quoting that. Some cardinals who entered the conclave in 2013 do not seem to understand the gravity of what happened in the conclave and continues to happen under false appearances of formal legality. We have heard them fiercely defend the papacy, declaring that the errors proposed by Bergoglio and his impromptu provocations are not to be considered papal magisterium. We heard them ask Bergoglio to resolve the dubia without him ever deigning to answer, and everything ended there. But this denunciation of the effects, that is, the present pontificate, he puts pontificate in quotes here, by the way, is completely useless as long as it refuses to recognize their causes in the conciliar revolution, sidelining this question. Their tetragonal desire to quote-unquote save the pseudo-magisterium of Vatican II, which is the remote cause of the present crisis, renders utterly useless any action in defense of the Church. As for their silence on the events that took place during the conclave, I see here as well a certain formally legalistic mentality prevailing over the urgent need to put an end to the subversive takeover by the embedded church, uses a term I can't use on YouTube. Their main concern is to not undermine the observance of norms that are valid in times of relative normality, so that it cannot be said that they violated human precepts. While their respect for procedures, they find themselves endorsing the violation of divine precepts carried out by none other than the leaders of the Catholic hierarchy. I find it incomprehensible that a member of the College of Cardinals can confide to friends that he has witnessed facts that render the election of Jorge Mario null and void, and at the same time he does not want to denounce them publicly, so as not to break the pontifical secret, the secret that he has already broken by talking about it with those who can do nothing, which forces his eminence into silence before the church, whose pastors could perhaps settle the question. But here we are not talking about the seal of confession, but rather about matters that have reason to be reserved until this is to the detriment of the institution that brought them into force. Otherwise, we find ourselves like the Pharisees of the gospel, who asked our Lord if it was lawful to pull a donkey out of the well on the Sabbath day. End quote. He's clearly talking about somebody in particular there. That's a heck of an accusation to make. There is, frankly, a lot of circumstantial evidence that this has happened, that it did in fact happen that way. And it is a much better line of reasoning for going after Francis than, quite frankly, the resignation of Benedict, or some of the accusations that he was a heretic before, the conclave. Because if there is a cardinal running around out there quietly telling people that he knows things about things that essentially prove that he'd be a witness to this, they could upend the whole thing. Now, Vigano, in that interview, he goes on to talk about the can make comparisons to the Cardinal Siri. And if you don't know about this, there's a specific sort of subset of sedevacantists who believe that the See of Peter has not been, so sedevacantism in general posits the hypothesis that there hasn't been a valid pope since the passing of Pius XII in 1958. That every pope since then, that would be John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI, as well as, of course, Francis, are all formal heretics and thus not pope. And they, in some cases, make some pretty good cases for that, although that, I think, is up to a future pope or magisterial authority to make that ruling on. But there's a subset of sedevacantism that is a little bit different, and they hold to the Cardinal Siri Thesis. And it says something like this, because it's based on historic fact. At the conclave that elected John the 23rd Pope in 1958, there was kind of a weird thing that happened. Out of that chimney that everybody watches, the white smoke that says we have a pope, basically, is a symbol of how, the election of a pontiff, billowed out. And then a little while later, black smoke, meaning no, we don't actually have a pope. And there have been a lot of accusations about this from all sorts of quarters, but basically the Siri thesis is this, that Cardinal Siri was elected Roman pontiff, not Roncalli. He would have taken, according to some, the papal name of Gregory, probably making him Gregory, I think, the 17th, but that he was then forced through rather nefarious means to not accept the papacy. And then they just kept going until they got Roncalli. That's the thesis. Is there evidence for it? Depends who you ask. It's an interesting thesis. It certainly is one. And Cardinal Siri spent the rest of his life in the Roman Curia, living in the Vatican, basically. There were the accusations that the Pope as prisoner hypothesis from some segments of Catholic prophecy were referring to him, because he lived there until like 1988. And then he was gone. Then he passed away. And there's a subset of sedevacantists who hold to the Siri thesis and say that he's not technically, there's technically a state of sedevacant because some people somehow elected a successor to Cardinal Siri. I'm not a sedevacantist. I don't hold to that position. I find it an interesting idea, but he makes, the reason that is I'm bringing that up here is because Archbishop Vegano makes some comparisons essentially to that, to the sort of nefarious politicking that would have gone on for that to be made possible. It's an interesting hypothesis, to say the least, and it's an interesting accusation from Archbishop Vegano, because he's almost suggesting that not only is Francis not legitimate, neither was John the 23rd, but there's a lot you can unpack here if you allow yourself to go there. I'm curious, though, let me know in the live chat what you think of this accusation, because again, there is, circumstantial evidence that at least with what Vigano is saying about Francis is here true. But the problem you run into, of course, is that nobody wants to speak up. And there is also the how corrupt are they in Rome these days? Not if they are. We know that they are. How corrupt? Are they willing to use extra legal means to remove a thorn in their side? Are they willing to do that? Some say they already have. I don't know. I'm not willing to go there. But the specter, so to speak, of Cardinal Pell looms over everything, because there have been accusations about that too. Now, after making his Cardinal Siri comparison, he does go on, and he says, quote, "The indiscretion of these cardinals focus on the evidence of serious irregularities without providing further details. I am reminded of what happened in 1958 with the question of the smoke that was initially white and then turned black. It seems that Cardinal Giuseppe Siri was elected, but then, due to the opposition of the regime behind the Iron Curtain at the time, the fathers were forced to elect another man as pope, who coincidentally turned out to be the conciliatory Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli. If these confidences are true, I dare not think of the moral travail of those who are preparing to take the secret to the grave, when they have had the opportunity of unmasking the intrigues and implots of the St. Gallen group. If they are not true, it would not make sense to talk about it even with the most trusted people, who, however, must have told others since the news has leaked." End quote. Because there is a cardinal apparently running around, running his mouth off to his friends, saying that he knows the truth about that conclave. I have not been able to find anything on that, though, since doing my research for this. So if you have something, if you know from some obscure like Italian news site or something that I'm just not seeing, send me an email. My favorite Italian news website has been remarkably quiet the last few weeks. I'm hoping that's just because Marco Tossati has gone on vacation or something. But in general, if you've seen this rumor floating around through some other places that Vegano is clearly seeing this from, send it to me in an email. My email address is in the description box of most of my videos. For whatever reason, it doesn't show up in the live streams, but I'll try to fix that for the replay later. But then he goes on and makes another interesting thing, and he says this kind of in passing, so I'm not going to quote him directly, but he says the next conclave essentially is stacked with cardinals who are so bad that will likely make the next result null and void also. And again, that's an enormous accusation because, again, you're likely to see politicking happen. In fact, one of the things I notice about the way the choosing of these cardinals has been is there has been a huge amount of these cardinals from the peripheries, as Francis likes to call it. And the peripheries here meaning not Europe, not North America, and not Mexico, even though there's a fair number of them from there, but from like the so-called developing world. Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, Central America, places like that. And one of the effects that that's had is a lot of these new cardinals, for better or worse, don't know each other. They've had barely any opportunity to speak with each other because one of the things that's supposed to happen at a consistory, which is where bishops are made into cardinals, there's supposed to be these kind of informal meetings where they're allowed to sort of rub shoulders, get to know one another, and that has not really happened under Francis. It's barely happened at all, to some degree, small amounts, but not very much. And the effect of that is the cardinals don't know each other. The only cardinals that the other cardinals know are ones who might be geographically close to them, or ones that they had pre-existing friendships with, and ones who are their points of contact in Rome. And who are those points of contact in Rome? Tobin, men like that. These are the worst of the worst cardinals, which makes them instantly more papabile. Now, again, any man who walks into a conclave for the election of a Roman pontiff as the presumed pontiff, 99% of the time walks out a cardinal, doesn't get the election, with the recent exception being, of course, for Benedict XVI, who kind of everybody knew was the front runner to succeed John Paul II. Let me go check the live chat here. But once again, I'll remind people that if you are a channel member, you get a free super chat. So please make use of that. And if you're a channel member somewhere else, use that free super chat feature. It is something you should take advantage of. Apparently, Bishop Strickland spoke at an event tonight, by the way. I have a video about attacks on Bishop Strickland for Monday, I guess tomorrow. So actually, it's exporting right now. Final post-production is done. I have to upload it here shortly, but it'll be for Monday. Saying some wicked evil things about him, so go check that out if you're Monday morning. But he said, a person in the chat says the church had more bishops in the mold of this faithful, outspoken prelate, the church would be flourishing. Generally, I agree. Although, as I say in that video tomorrow, I caution people from placing on a pedestal any of the better bishops, because inevitably they say something that disappoints. They always do. Because again, we labor under the diabolic disorientation that's running through the church right now. So pray. So if you hold a bishop in high esteem, anytime you're tempted to, give him some weird title, some people call him like America's bishop, instead offer a prayer for him that he will have the fortitude to continue the good work he's doing. The last thing we need to do is inadvertently help them destroy the illusion other people might have about them. If they believe in unnatural, yeah. Mark Becker says if they believe in, we'll just say bad things, including idolatry, would we be surprised for some of these cardinals? No, I wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be surprised at all. We're talking about the kinds of bishops that, they come from places where, the enculturated masses might be something they want. I'm not a fan of enculturated masses in general. I don't mean like, so in Central America and Mexico and some places, you sometimes have, some celebrations after the mass that are local cultural things. I'm not talking about stuff like that. I'm talking about pinching incense to demons, basically, is what it means. So one of the members in the chat says the Decline and Fall of the Roman Church by Malachi Martin. In that book, shows that this election is not that unusual. Perhaps they're not supposed to be politicking, though. According to, in fact, those rules promulgated by John Paul II were in the mid 1990s, so it could be that is what that practice that Malcolm Martin describes in that book is what John Paul II was trying to prevent in the future. Now, whether or not he had the authority to say yes or no to that, as Pope, I'll leave that to you to decide. Say almost anything possible. Do I believe this? Mostly yes. Yeah, I tend to think Vegano here is hearing something that's real, that's out there, that needs to be addressed. But unfortunately, I'd like to know who the cardinal is, and he doesn't actually say anything. So if you have the information on who he's talking about from some obscure French or Italian or German or whatever blog, please send it to me, because I've looked. I have no idea who he's talking about here. But he's hearing something, and it could also just be his sources in the Roman Curia, because Vigano may be living in hiding somewhere, probably Italy, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't have active sources and people he trusts who work in lowly positions in the Roman Curia. People who wisely keep their mouth quiet, don't say the things that they really think. They just are there to be Vigano's eyes and ears, essentially. I suspect that's very much the case there. Just a couple more things I think we'll talk about today. In the coming days, I'll have an update for you on the certain government agency snooping on Catholics thing. There's some interesting details that have come out about that, and there's an important date on that coming up, and that date is August 22nd, so keep your eyes out for that. That's the deadline that the legislatures have asked for all the details of that program and the full scope. And I suspect strongly that we're going to get information that confirms what we have all known already, that this is national in scope. So keep your eyes peeled on that story. If you've got anybody has footage of or reporting on Bishop Strickland's talk tonight that happened Saturday night, please send me a link in my email. I would greatly appreciate it. Sometimes he does these events and then they're not recorded, though, or they're not well advertised, which is unfortunate. But if he's traveling in other people's dioceses, he generally has to get the permission of the local ordinary to go do things. And I'm hoping he's been doing that, because if he hasn't, then that will give them more than enough reason to strip him of his formal office. He may still be a bishop, but have no job. And I'm not saying he would have earned that. That would just be an on-paper excuse that the Roman authorities will use to take away one of the most important bishops in the church today. Yes, human weakness and greed are the rule of the day in Rome, as Paul says in the chat. There was also a document that was pushed out by Opus, that affects mostly Opus Dei, an organization that, quite frankly, traditional Catholics are not usually fans of, because while they were founded before the council, after the council, they had served as sort of a safety net, a place to send traditionally minded Catholics to keep them in the sort of the new order of things, the Novus Ordo, and as an alternative to the SSPX and to the independent priests who were running around in the 70s and 80s offering the traditional sacraments and traditional liturgy. That was what it was for. And whether you like them or not, that is just how they were used. And this new document affects what we call personal prelatures. And it essentially changes dramatically their governing of how those are governed. Puts a lot more controls and centralizes things in the hands of Rome. On the one hand, it doesn't look bad, but that's usually how these documents go. And the question being asked here is, are you going to see the FSSP and Institute of Christ the King and other groups treated like a personal prelature, essentially being under the authority of a bishop who has very, very important and very strong powers given to him over these personal prelatures, some that could hamstring these groups? We shall see. There's not a lot to say about this out there because the document isn't terribly long itself, and Opus Dei issued a weird statement saying that they humbly and on bended knee submit themselves to this rule, because it fundamentally changes how they are governed. If anybody here does go to Mass with Opus Dei or has connections to Opus Dei, let me know in the comments what you're hearing from your Opus Dei sources on this, because this is an unusual document, to say the least. and it's getting very little coverage. I don't know, has any traditional commentators said anything about this? I don't watch a lot of Catholic content these days simply because I don't want to accidentally copy what somebody else says, a point someone else makes. So I'll usually watch something once the story is passed. But I'm curious, has anybody mentioned this? Because I haven't seen anything other than like a little reporting in the news and a couple posts on Facebook groups. Nothing has come from this. But now the groundwork is laid, it looks like, to put tighter controls not only on Opus Dei, who are, frankly, one of the rigid organizations. Like, if there is any organization that has been impacted potentially by the restriction of Mass in Latin in the Novus Ordo, or with altar rails, or the priest facing ad orientem, meaning he's facing typically the tabernacle. If the parish is built in any rational way, the tabernacle is going to be behind the altar, or the altar will be on the wall, and the Mass is said with his back to the laity, the way it had been, for almost 2,000 years. If any Novus Ordo organization has been impacted by this, it would be Opus Dei. And so this has looked like another opportunity to further tighten the thumb screws on them, because they are, for anything else you may feel about them, they are one of the rigid organizations out there. Rigid clericalist organizations that Francis finds so distasteful. So again, let me know in the comments if you have seen that. I am very curious. Jeep Guy says Opus Dei was and is infiltrated. Of course. I mean, everything top to bottom in Novus Ordo world is. I mean, it is. I mean, I go to Mass with the FSSP most of the time, and the FSSP is also. I mean, they just are. I mean, you will find homilies from FSSP priests who will say some really weird things. So it just happens. But the question that remains out there is the FSSP going to be brought into this personal prelature status? Will the other groups like them? And of course, with how dialogue happens with the SSPX, between SSPX and Rome, if they'll be offered to be treated as a personal prelature. And if that is, then that sounds like a trap to me for them. I think that's enough for us tonight, though. So let me know in the comments what you think of the Vegano thing. I will post sources for this soon once this live stream goes live. Once the live stream is done and has had a chance to become a regular video, I will post links to in my show notes to that full interview so you can read it for yourself. It's actually pretty lengthy. I quote it in another video in the coming days. Oh, Jeep Guy says a friend of his is a former Opus Dei. He has friends still there. They said Rome has dissolved the legal structure, has reduced it to a congregation of priests. Yeah, which means that it could also be swept away at the whim of Rome. I don't think they'll do that unless Opus Dei gives them a reason to, and I think that's the whole point. The change of the personal prelature is to put a sword of Damocles over any organization covered by it, to keep them in line, to keep those rigid priests in line. Because, of course, when we live in a time of dialogue, accompaniment, and all the rest of it, that's what we are going to be given. That's what it means. I'll leave it at that. So, as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stein. Ave Maria.